I rescued a wounded Apache girl, and now she says I'm her husband. The sun was slowly going down over the wide desert, painting the sky with soft orange and red colors. The land looked endless and quiet, with dry sand, small rocks, and thorny bushes stretching far in every direction. The man drove his old pickup truck carefully along a narrow dirt road. He was tired after a long day of work, but his mind was calm. He liked these lonely roads. Silence had become his companion over the years. He was a simple man, living alone on the edge of a small town not far from tribal lands. His life followed a routine: work, home, sleep, and then the same again. He did not expect surprises anymore. He believed life had already shown him everything it could. As he drove, he noticed something strange near a dry riverbed. The sand looked disturbed, as if someone had fallen or been dragged. At first he thought it might be an animal. Out here, that was common. He slowed the truck but planned to keep driving. Getting involved usually brought trouble, and he had learned long ago to avoid trouble when possible. But then he saw a hand move. His foot pressed the brake without thinking. The truck stopped, and dust floated in the air. His heart started beating faster. He looked around, checking if anyone else was nearby. The desert was quiet, too quiet. He stepped out of the truck, the heat still strong even as evening came closer. Slowly, carefully, he walked toward the riverbed. Each step felt heavy, like his body was warning him to turn back. Still, he kept going. There, lying between rocks and dry sand, was a young girl. She looked badly hurt. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her dark hair tangled and full of dust. Her skin was warm, but her breathing was weak. When she noticed him, her eyes opened wide with fear. She tried to move away but didn't have the strength. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. She did not understand his words, but she understood fear. Her body shook as she tried to crawl backward. A quiet sound escaped her lips, not a word, just pain and warning. He knelt a short distance away, not getting too close. He could see blood on her leg and arm, dried and fresh mixed together. His chest tightened. Leaving her here meant she would not survive the night. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said again, even though he knew she might not understand. His voice was calm, slow. She watched him closely, like a wounded animal. Her eyes were sharp, dark, and filled with something deeper than fear, pride maybe, strength. He slowly took off his jacket and placed it on the ground, pushing it gently toward her. She did not take it at first. Only after a long moment did she pull it closer, using it to cover herself. That small action told him she was at least listening. He checked her injuries carefully, using water from his bottle to clean what he could. She winced but did not scream. That surprised him. She was young but strong in a quiet way. As the sun sank lower, the temperature began to drop. He knew they could not stay there. Night in the desert was dangerous, especially for someone injured. "I need to move you," he said gently, pointing toward his truck. She followed his hand with her eyes. Her face showed confusion, then fear again. She shook her head weakly. He paused. Forcing her would break the trust he had just begun to build. He thought for a moment, then took out his phone. There was no signal, but he showed her the screen, then the truck, trying to explain he was alone. Slowly, painfully, she nodded. He carefully lifted her, surprised by how light she felt. She stiffened at first but did not fight him. Her head rested briefly against his shoulder, and he felt how weak she truly was. The drive back felt longer than usual. He kept glancing at her, making sure she was still awake. She stared out the window, silent, her hands clenched tightly in his jacket. When they reached his small house, he carried her inside and laid her on the couch. The place was simple. One bedroom, a small kitchen, and not much else. It had never needed more. He cleaned her wounds more carefully this time and wrapped them as best he could. She watched everything he did, saying nothing. When he finished, he stepped back to give her space. He brought her water and food, leaving it within reach. At first, she refused. Only when he moved away did she slowly drink. Each small sip felt like a victory. That night he barely slept. He stayed in a chair nearby, listening to her breathing, ready in case she needed help. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? How did she end up alone and injured? And what would happen when people started looking for her? In the quiet hours before dawn, she woke up and looked at him. Their eyes met. For the first time, her expression softened just a little. She spoke a few words in her own language. He didn't understand them, but her voice was calm now, no longer filled with fear. "My name is," he started, then stopped. He pointed to himself and said his name slowly. She watched, then pointed to herself and said hers just as slowly. He nodded. It was a small beginning, but it felt important. Outside, the desert waited, silent and wide. Inside that small house, two lives had crossed in a way neither of them could have expected. He had stopped for a moment he could have ignored. Because of that, nothing would ever be the same again. And he did not yet know that this rescue, this simple act of kindness, would soon turn his quiet life upside down in ways he could never have imagined. Morning light entered the small house slowly, slipping through the thin curtains and touching the floor with a soft glow. The desert outside was quiet, as if holding its breath. The man woke up from his chair with a stiff neck and tired eyes. He had not slept much, but the first thing he did was look toward the couch. The girl was still there. She lay very still at first, her chest rising and falling gently. Relief washed over him. He stood up carefully, trying not to make noise. When he moved closer, her eyes opened. Instantly, her body tensed, and her hand pulled the jacket tighter around her. "It's okay," he said softly. He pointed to the window, then to the kitchen, trying to show her it was morning and she was safe. She did not answer. Her eyes followed him everywhere, alert and watchful. She sat up slowly, pain showing on her face, but she did not complain. He admired that strength, even though it worried him. He made simple food, bread, eggs, and warm tea. The smell filled the small space. He placed the plate on the table and stepped back, giving her room. At first, she ignored it. Only after several minutes did she move, limping slightly as she approached. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone who had learned not to trust comfort. As the day passed, silence filled the house. It was not an empty silence. It was heavy, filled with questions and thoughts neither of them could speak. He cleaned the house more than usual, just to give his hands something to do. Every now and then, he looked at her to make sure she was all right. She stayed close to the wall, always keeping distance. When he moved too suddenly, she flinched. When a truck passed outside, she froze, her eyes wide with fear. That was when he understood. Whatever had happened before he found her had left deep marks, not only on her body but in her heart. He wanted to ask questions, but words felt useless. Instead, he showed her small kindnesses. Clean water, fresh bandages, a blanket when the night grew cold. He spoke gently, even when he knew she could not understand. His tone carried what his words could not. Days passed slowly. Her wounds began to heal, though she still walked with pain. Each morning she grew a little stronger, and each day the space between them grew a little smaller. One afternoon, he stepped outside to fix a loose board near the door. When he came back inside, he noticed something different. She was standing near the window, looking out at the desert. For the first time, she was not sitting in a corner. She noticed him watching and quickly turned away, but she did not retreat to the couch. That night she surprised him again. As he sat in his chair, she moved closer and sat on the floor a short distance away. She did not speak, but she stayed. That small act felt louder than words. He nodded to her, respecting the moment. Later, she pointed to the bandage on her leg and spoke softly in her language. Her voice was calm but serious. He did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She was explaining something important. He listened carefully, even though he could not follow the language. When she finished, she placed her hand over her heart briefly, then lowered it. Something in his chest tightened. Whatever story she carried was heavy. The next morning, she surprised him again. He woke up to the sound of movement in the kitchen. His heart jumped, worried she might be hurt. But when he entered, he saw her standing by the counter, carefully pouring water into a cup. She looked at him, startled, then looked down. He smiled gently and nodded, telling her it was okay. That simple moment felt like a bridge forming between them. Over time, they developed a way to communicate without words, gestures, expressions, and patience. He learned which movements frightened her and avoided them. She learned that when he raised his hand, it was not to threaten but to explain. One evening, while he was cleaning a small cut on her arm, she suddenly spoke a word in English. Just one. Safe. He froze, then looked up. She was watching him closely, as if waiting for his reaction. Yes, he said slowly. You're safe. She nodded. That night he sat alone after she went to sleep, staring at the wall. He knew the truth he had been avoiding. She could not stay hidden forever. Someone would come looking, and when they did, his quiet life would no longer be quiet. A few days later, his fear became real. He noticed tire marks near the road, fresh ones, not his. That evening she sensed the change in him. She watched his face, reading his worry. When he pointed outside, she stiffened. Her hands clenched and her breathing changed. She shook her head again and again, fear returning to her eyes. He crouched in front of her, keeping his voice calm. I won't let anyone hurt you, he said, even though he knew promises were dangerous. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his arm lightly. It was the first time she had touched him on her own. Her voice was steady when she spoke, though the words were still in her language, but her eyes told him enough. She trusted him. That trust weighed heavy on his heart. That night, sleep did not come easily. He thought about her future, about her past, and about the path he had stepped onto without realizing it. Helping her had not been a choice anymore. It had become a responsibility. As the desert wind brushed against the house, he understood something clearly for the first time. Saving her life had not ended at the riverbed. It had only just begun. The days after that felt heavier, as if the air inside the house had changed. Nothing bad had happened yet, but both of them could feel something coming. The man moved more carefully now. He checked outside before opening the door. He listened longer at night. Every sound seemed louder than before. The girl noticed everything. She watched him closely, her sharp eyes catching each change in his behavior. When he grew quiet, she grew quiet too. When he looked worried, her body stiffened. Fear had not fully left her. It was only sleeping, waiting for a reason to wake again. One afternoon, while the sun burned high and the desert shimmered in the distance, she surprised him by speaking more English than before. "Why you help?" she asked slowly. He looked up from where he was fixing a chair. Her words were simple, but the question behind them was deep. He thought for a moment. Then he said, "Because you were hurt. Anyone should help." She studied his face as if searching for something hidden. Then she looked down at her hands. "Not everyone," she said quietly. Her words stayed with him long after she went silent again. That evening she asked another question, pointing toward the desert. "Home far?" "Yes," he said, "far." She nodded slowly, then surprised him by standing up straighter, even though pain still lingered in her movements. She walked to the center of the room and spoke in her language, calmly and clearly, as if telling a story she had told before. He listened even though he could not understand the words. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried old pain. When she finished, she pointed toward herself, then toward him, then placed her hand over her heart. He frowned slightly, confused. "I don't understand," he admitted gently. She tried again, using gestures this time. She pointed outside, made a motion like falling, then pointed at him, mimicking lifting someone up. Then she stood tall, placed her hand over her heart again, and finally pointed at him with certainty. "Mine," she said. He blinked. "Mine," she nodded once, firm and serious. At first he thought she meant trust, belonging in a safe way, but then she spoke another word. "Husband." The word hit him like a sudden wind. "What?" he said, standing up too quickly. She did not step back, she did not look afraid, she looked calm, sure, as if stating a simple fact. "You saved," she said slowly. "You protect my husband." He shook his head, half laughing, half confused. "No, no, that's not, I just helped you, that's all." Her eyebrows pulled together slightly, not in anger but in confusion. She spoke again in her language, longer this time, explaining carefully. She spoke about honor, about protection, about how a life saved created a bond that could not be ignored. He listened, his smile fading. This was not a joke to her. This was belief, tradition, something deep and serious. "I didn't know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I never agreed to that." She looked at him steadily. "You act," she said. "Action is promise." The room felt smaller suddenly. That night he could not sleep. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words again and again. Husband, promise, honor. He had lived his whole life believing that choices were clear, that promises were spoken. Now he faced something he had never considered. In the morning he tried to explain. He spoke slowly, using simple words and gestures. He told her that where he came from, helping someone did not mean marriage, that he respected her beliefs but could not accept something he never chose. She listened quietly. When he finished, she nodded once. "I know your world," she said softly. "You not know mine." Her calm response made him feel worse, not better. Later that day, a truck passed slowly on the road. Dust rose behind it. He froze. She froze too. She moved closer to him without thinking. He knew then that things were reaching a turning point. That evening, two figures appeared near the edge of the property. He noticed them first, standing still, watching the house. His heart dropped. He stepped in front of her without thinking, blocking her from view. The figures did not approach. They spoke to each other, then turned and left. She watched them go, her face pale. "They come," she said. "Who?" he asked. "My people." Silence filled the room. Later, when darkness fell, she spoke again. "They will ask, you must answer." "Answer what?" he asked. She looked at him with steady eyes. "If you are my husband." The weight of her words pressed down on him. He had thought helping her was the hard part. Now he saw that the real challenge was only beginning. Outside, the desert wind howled softly, carrying with it questions he was not ready to answer. The next morning arrived with a quiet tension. The desert outside was bright and still, but inside the small house, both the man and the girl felt a weight pressing on their shoulders. They had been living carefully for weeks, avoiding any attention, speaking slowly and with caution, but now the danger was no longer hidden. Her people had noticed her absence. They were searching, and she knew they would come for answers. He woke before sunrise, sitting in the chair near the window, staring out at the vast landscape. His mind raced with possibilities. How would he face them? What would he say? What if they blamed him for taking her away? Every possible scenario seemed worse than the last. His life had been quiet, predictable. This responsibility was more than he had ever imagined. The girl woke shortly after him. She moved quietly, wrapping herself in the jacket he had given her. She avoided his gaze at first, but he could feel her watching him from the corner of her eyes. Her strength had returned somewhat, but the fear in her eyes was still deep. She knew what was coming, and he could sense her heart pounding even through her calm posture. Mid-morning, the sound of vehicles reached them, 2 trucks, slow and cautious. Dust rose in the distance. His stomach tightened. He motioned for her to stay down, moving closer to the door to see without being seen. Through the small window he saw them, 3 men and 1 older woman. Their posture, the way they moved, told him they were not casual travelers. They were searching and they were serious. He turned to her. "Stay here," he whispered. She shook her head, refusing. She had survived so much by relying on her instincts. Now, she instinctively knew she had to be part of the conversation. She walked toward him, steady but slow, holding her hands out to show she meant no harm. When the group arrived at the door, the woman spoke first. Her voice was firm but not angry. She called to the girl in her native language. The girl's eyes met his for a moment. There was fear there, yes, but also determination. She knew what she had to say. The woman looked at him sharply. "You have brought her here," he nodded slowly. "Yes, she was hurt, she needed help." The woman's eyes softened slightly, but she did not lower her guard. "You know the rules of our people," he shook his head. "I did not know." The girl stepped forward, speaking in her language. She explained carefully, clearly. She spoke of the rescue, of the nights he had stayed awake by her side, of the safety he had given her when she had nowhere else to go. And then she said the words that made his heart stop, the words he had not imagined he would hear in this situation. "This man," she said, pointing at him, "is my husband." He looked at her, stunned. His mind raced. "No, please, that's not," but she continued. "He saved me. He protected me. That makes him my husband. It is tradition. It is honor. He cannot deny it." The older woman nodded slowly. She looked at him with serious eyes. "It is true," she said. "In our tradition, a man who saves a woman's life becomes bound to her. He protects her. He provides safety. He is her husband whether he wants it or not." The man felt the weight of the words like a heavy stone in his chest. He had never faced anything like this. He had never imagined that a simple act of kindness could carry such meaning. But as he looked at the girl, standing tall, proud even in her fear, he understood that her words were not empty. This was serious. I never meant this," he said slowly. "I was only trying to help. I did not know about your customs." She looked at him steadily. "Actions speak louder than words. You acted. That is enough. You cannot deny it." His mind raced. If he refused, it could dishonor her and put her in danger. If he accepted, he would bind himself to a responsibility he had never chosen. Either way, his life would never be the same. For hours they stood there, neither side moving. He spoke carefully, trying to explain his world, his ideas of freedom, of choice. She listened patiently, but her eyes told him she did not need to hear his reasons. Her heart, her people, and her traditions had already decided. Finally, he realized there was no way to avoid it. The choice was no longer about him alone. It was about her safety, her honor, and the bond that had already begun to form between them. He took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "I will do what is right," he said. "I will protect you. I will not leave you alone." Her eyes softened just slightly. She did not smile, but there was a quiet relief there, like a burden had been lifted. The older woman nodded as well, satisfied. The rest of the day was tense but calm. They spoke through gestures and slow words. He asked her about her family, about her village, and she answered carefully, giving only what she could. She did not reveal everything. Some things were too painful, but enough to show him the depth of what she had experienced. As night fell, he lit a small lantern. The flickering light cast shadows across the walls, making the small house feel both warm and heavy with meaning. The girl sat nearby, quiet but watchful. He realized that the bond she had spoken of was not only tradition, it was trust, it was respect, it was something more powerful than words. He knew the coming days would not be easy. Her people would continue to watch, questions would arise, and the rules of her world would continue to press against the rules of his. But for the first time, he also understood something important. Helping someone was not just about fixing wounds or giving shelter. It was about understanding, listening, and respecting the life that had been entrusted to him. And sometimes, that meant accepting responsibilities he had never imagined. As he closed his eyes that night, he felt a strange mix of fear, duty, and something else, something he had not expected. Perhaps it was a quiet connection forming, born from shared moments of fear, trust, and survival. Outside, the desert wind whispered against the small house, carrying with it the sense of a world larger than his own, a world where honor, tradition, and trust could change a man's life forever. He knew that his life had shifted on its axis. There was no turning back. He had been chosen by circumstance, by action, and by trust. And now, he would have to navigate a path he had never walked before, one that demanded courage, patience, and an understanding of a world far beyond his own. The night grew darker, but inside the small house, A quiet determination took root. They had survived the immediate danger, and now, together, they faced a more profound challenge: understanding each other, honoring their worlds, and moving forward into a life that neither of them could have predicted. And in that quiet, uncertain moment, he realized that sometimes the hardest paths were the ones worth taking, and the most unexpected bonds could teach the deepest lessons. The house was still, the desert wide, and two lives had become entwined in a way that would shape everything to come. The next morning felt different. The desert sun rose slowly, painting the sand and rocks in soft gold. A calm breeze whispered through the small house, carrying with it a sense of change. Inside, the man sat at the table, drinking coffee, thinking. His mind was filled with questions he could not answer easily. He had accepted the responsibility the girl had placed on him, but understanding what it truly meant was another matter entirely. The girl woke shortly after him. She moved carefully, still tender from the injuries she had carried, yet her posture was strong and proud. She looked around the small room, her eyes resting on him briefly before she began gathering her things. She spoke softly in her language, and though he could not understand the words, her tone was calm and certain. He nodded to her, indicating it was okay. Their bond was no longer just survival or protection. It had grown into something neither could define fully yet. It was trust, understanding, and respect all at once. He had learned to read her expressions, the slight movements of her hands, the tilt of her head. Each small gesture told him more than words ever could. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly. The vehicles from her people had not returned, but he knew they would. He was ready now, not just to face them, but to do what was right. The girl sensed his readiness and stayed close, walking beside him as he checked the perimeter. Her hand brushed lightly against his arm, a quiet signal that she trusted him to lead. By midday, her people arrived, this time more cautiously. They did not rush or shout. They came slowly, observing the house and the man who had taken care of their daughter. The older woman approached first. Her eyes were sharp, but there was no anger now, only respect. "You have stayed true," she said simply. "You have cared for her. You have protected her." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I only did what I thought was right," he said. The girl stepped forward. Her eyes met his, and he saw determination there. She spoke in her language, explaining again how he had saved her life, how he had kept her safe, and how that action meant something far deeper than either of them had fully understood at first. The elders listened, nodding as she spoke. The rules of her people were clear. A man who saves and protects a woman in danger becomes bound to her. But now, they saw not just the rule but the choice and care behind it. They could see the bond that had grown between the two, not forced, but formed naturally. The man realized that the decision he had feared for so long was no longer just about him. It was about respect, honor, and the connection they had both built. He looked at the girl, and she met his gaze steadily. There was no fear now, only quiet confidence. "I will honor her," he said finally, his voice calm and firm. "I will protect her as long as I live. That is my promise." The elders nodded, satisfied. They could see he understood the responsibility not as an obligation, but as a choice born from respect and care. The girl's eyes softened just slightly, relief and trust visible in her expression. The following days were filled with adjustments. Life together was a careful dance of learning and understanding. He learned more about her traditions, her past, and her ways of seeing the world. She learned more about his life, his thoughts, and his quiet routines. Their communication was a mix of gestures, broken words, and patient listening, but it grew stronger each day. He helped her recover fully, not just physically but emotionally. They spent long hours outside, walking carefully through the desert, talking through gestures and simple words. He showed her his world, the small town where he lived, the routines he had long taken for granted. She shared her stories too, fragments of her past, the life she had left behind, the lessons her family had taught her. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in red and gold, they sat together outside. The desert was quiet, the wind gentle. She leaned slightly toward him, and for the first time he felt a connection deeper than duty or obligation. It was trust, respect, and the quiet comfort of knowing that someone depended on you and you depended on them. "You safe?" he asked softly, using the simplest words he could. She nodded, her eyes meeting his. "Safe," she said, and in that single word they both understood the truth. Safety was not just about walls or protection. It was about trust, about being there for each other, about choosing to care when the world had been cruel before. The desert nights were long and quiet, and in that stillness they continued to learn each other's ways. He learned patience, the strength of silence, and the quiet power of listening. She learned that kindness could exist outside of fear, and that trust could grow slowly, like a small plant surviving in harsh soil. Time passed, and the bond between them grew stronger. It was not the kind of love born from fairy tales or stories, but a real, grounded connection. They had faced fear, danger, and misunderstanding together. They had crossed a bridge between worlds, between cultures, between hearts, and they had emerged stronger on the other side. One morning, as he repaired a fence near the edge of his property, she came to stand beside him, helping with small tasks. Their hands brushed once or twice, and each time, a quiet acknowledgement passed between them, a recognition of the journey they had taken together. Her people no longer watched from a distance. They had seen the truth. He was a man who had acted with care, courage, and respect. They had accepted him, not just as a protector, but as someone who understood the meaning of honor and trust. The man looked at the girl, standing tall despite her small frame, and felt a quiet pride. She had survived so much, and now she thrived, not because he had saved her, but because they had faced everything together. He had learned that helping someone was more than action. It was commitment, understanding, and heart. As the sun set behind the distant hills, painting the desert in gold and shadow, they walked together back to the small house. The wind was warm, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and wild plants. Inside, the house no longer felt small or confining. It was a place of safety, understanding, and beginnings. He realized finally that life had changed forever. Saving her had not just altered her path, it had altered his. The quiet man who had lived a simple, predictable life now carried responsibility, trust, and connection. He had learned the depth of courage, the power of compassion, and the meaning of honor in ways he had never imagined. And she had learned, too, that the world was not only fear and pain, but also kindness, protection, and trust. Together they had created something neither had expected, a bond that could not be broken, a life shaped by choice, respect, and shared courage. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, quiet and vast. But inside, two lives had become intertwined, forever changed by a simple act of rescue, by trust, and by the quiet, steady choice to care for one another. And in that still desert night, under the soft glow of the moon, both of them knew that no matter what challenges came next, they would face them together. For they had learned that true safety, true connection, and true honor came not from rules alone, but from the courage to stand by each other, no matter what.